who come in and people who are researching.
For people like myself?
Yes.
Well, I'll just have a wee quiet corner because it's a very comfortable place, and I must say you're doing a great job here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Aye, a quiet corner. The ladies lit the fire, they brought me cups of tea, they pointed out all sorts of things that I would never have found for myself. And the things that you find out in that library, apart from all the gold and silver that's been found, the people who have come to Leadhills and changed the nature of the place because they were so far-sighted. And one extraordinary man, apart from Alan Ramsay, was a man they called the Venetian. Collier's Essays, Milton, Dickens, the works of the great Dr. Johnson, and something here about life in Italy. And one of the great men of all time in Leadhills was a Scotsman by the name of James Stirling. He came here at the age of 43, marvellous scholar, but everybody wondered why he came to Leadhills. He was such a brilliant mathematician with a great academic life behind him. The reason is he was a suspected Jacobite. He'd been arrested at about the time of the first Jacobite rising. And it was a great stroke of fortune for the people of Leadhills that he came here, because the first thing he noted about the miners, who were working very long shifts and the mine was doing very poorly financially, the first thing he noticed was how intelligent they were and how industrious. And after he'd applied his mind to this kind of industry, he cut the shifts from about 10 hours to 6 hours. And in no time at all, the mine was beginning to pay profits, and the men were beginning to enjoy life much more, because he taught them a lot of things which they hadn't thought about. He encouraged them to break up wee plots of land, to keep cattle, to apply themselves to study, because at that time education by no means belonged to everybody. Ordinary working men weren't educated. They had no means. There was no compulsory schooling. And he instilled into them the benefits that would accrue to them, and did extremely well himself and made life for the miners good. So you can say that he was a pioneer in the same way that Robert Owen of New Lanark was, and he is remembered warmly by the folks of Leadhills to this day. Ramsay's fame extended far beyond Scotland for his collection of poetry and the songs he wrote of Scotland, which paved the way for Burns and Ferguson. That was something very notable, but even more notable was what he did for this village, so far as the people of Leadhills are concerned. And the same applies to James Stirling, one of the great mathematicians of the 18th century. Because his face didn't fit in politics, he came here and gave his great gifts to this village. And I'm away to take a close look at it. It's probably true to say that there was never a time in history when so many young old men were going about. I base that on the evidence of folks I know. Some people think I'm a spry fellow, but I'm a youngster compared to some of the folks I know. For example, a friend of mine, Stan Bradshaw, a fell runner, came to the house the other day, and he told me he was going in for the Ben Nevis race for the 16th time. He's a veteran, and yet his time for the return journey to the top from Fort William, or from the Fort William Park, is 2.5 hours. I met a man of 70 who had climbed every peak in the Coolin Ridge in one day, and that's very exceptional going. So I wasn't really surprised when I read in the papers the other day of a Japanese gentleman by the name of Mr. Aizume, who was celebrating his 114th birthday. But that's nothing to Leadhills, where they've got an exceptional record. Ah well, great morning for a walk here in Leadhills, one of the 2 highest villages in Scotland. And here I am, using a stick in this wee slope. You must think I'm getting past it. But this fine old piece of blackthorn belonged to an extraordinary man by the name of John Taylor. Extraordinary? I'll tell you why. At the age of 116, he went out fishing up in the hills there. He went away up 2 burns to fish. and it came on snowing, and it got heavier and heavier. It became a really wild blizzard, and old John was beginning to get a bit concerned about getting home. He was 116 at the time, remember, and there was something that he had to consider, and that was to leave his rod and his stuff and beat it over the hills, which he did, only he didn't quite make it. A search party was made. John was found alive. He revived fine, and the first thing he did was went back to look for his fishing rod. That man lived and worked in the mines until he was 127, and at the age of 128 he lived 2 miles down the road. He walked up the road, visited his children and grandchildren, and walked back again. Well, John Taylor was a miner from a very early age. He can remember, or could remember, the great eclipse of the sun, the total eclipse in 1652. The only man who could do so in this village, and he used to love to talk about the Mirka day, when he was called up out of the mines because birds were falling out of the sky. Day had been turned into night. Now John Taylor is buried over the wall, and I want to see his grave. Now, where are we? Here, what's this? In memory of Thomas Weir, overseer to the Scots Mining Company, died 11th April 1852. Reading your own gravestone. Ah, here we are. The headstone of John Taylor. It says in the grave, John Taylor, aged 137. Well, people around here say that that isn't true, that he was a mere youngster of 133 when he died. And why I've got this stick is I'm hoping that some of that benefit will rub off on me. You know, at the age of 128, a year after John had retired from the mines, he lived 2 miles down the valley then, in a thatched button ben like most of the folk here. He walked up the valley to visit his children and grandchildren and walked back again. And it's said that latterly, after he retired, he used to feel the cold a bit. In the really cold weather, he used to go to bed and take a glass of brandy occasionally to warm his stomach. I was shown this place called Gauskers as the place where old John Taylor finished his days. A grouse moor today, and amongst the heather there you can see the outlines of old John's house. Now, Mrs. Jenny Kay, you've a rare old story about John Taylor. Tell me it again.
Well, they say when he was 100 years of age, he thought the Lord had forgotten about him. And he asked his friends to take him up to the top of the highest hill, the Green Lowther, and leave him there, which they did, beseeching the Lord to remember his faithful servant and take him into glory. But the Lord had other ideas, so his friends had to go and bring him home again, where he lived for other 33 years.
To 133?
Yes.
Well, he saw a lot of changes, and if some of this good luck of that stick rubs off on me, I'll see a few myself.
I'll see you will.
Let's go to that cup of tea. Fine.
Right.
I brought up an old boy, John Taylor, and he had a grandson who became a mine manager. So there was good stuff there. A man, John, in his prime at 90. Well, there's hope for us all in that. There's a lot of other names about here. Long before John was a mining man, they were taking out a lot of gold. And one man who's remembered is a man called Bevis Bulmer. He's remembered in Bulmer's Moss. He made over £100,000 in gold. He had 30 men working for him. But he died a poor man. He was knighted for his great work for the country, and he died in debt to the tune of £340. He must have been living it up. And then he was followed by another man who was mining gold and did very well. And this man, George Bowes, he fell down a mine shaft and was killed. So it looks as if you should stick to lead, and one great miner is remembered.
That this boy who was born here in Leadhills 6 years after Alan Ramsay the poet died,